The sun hung low in the sky, casting long orange shadows over the dusty plains. The wind carried the dry smell of dirt and grass, and the distant mountains shimmered like a mirage in the heat. At the edge of the vast frontier, a small trading camp buzzed quietly with activity. This camp was a lifeline for travelers, traders, and ranchers who needed supplies, food, or information. Among the scattered tents and rough wooden stalls, a man rode slowly toward the center. His name was Samuel, a rancher who had seen better days. His hat was worn, his coat dusty, and his horse tired. But despite the hardships, there was a steady determination in his eyes. Samuel had survived many challenges, yet the recent years had tested him more than ever. He had come to the trading camp not for leisure but out of necessity. The drought had been relentless, and many of his cattle had perished. His ranch, once bustling with activity, had grown quiet and desolate. Neighbors had begun whispering about his struggles, and he felt the weight of their judgment. Samuel knew he had to secure supplies, and perhaps some help to keep what little remained of his land and livelihood. But there was something unusual about this camp. Unlike the towns closer to the river, this camp sat on the boundary between the settlers' lands and Apache territory. The air seemed charged with caution, a mixture of fear, respect, and a strange curiosity for the unknown. As Samuel dismounted, he noticed the trader first. He was a man who had spent years moving between settlements, carrying goods, and sometimes people, though not always in ways that aligned with morality. He had sharp eyes, quick hands, and a voice that could cut through the chatter of the camp. Samuel approached the stall slowly, careful not to give the impression that he was here to buy more than he intended. The trader greeted him with a sly smile, one that seemed to hide more than it revealed. His eyes flicked toward a woman standing behind him, half in shadow, her expression unreadable. "Enjoy, rancher. She bites," the trader said, almost as if he were mocking Samuel before any introduction was made. There was a hint of amusement in his voice, the kind that unsettled those who were not prepared for it. Samuel frowned but said nothing. He had heard rumors in his travels, whispers of a woman in the region, someone considered wild and untamable. Travelers told stories of her defiance, of the way she refused to be controlled, and of the danger she seemed to bring simply by existing. Yet, when Samuel looked at her, he did not see danger in the way others did. He saw strength, resilience, and perhaps a lifetime of suffering that had shaped her into someone who would not bow to fear or authority. The woman's presence made Samuel pause. He had seen hardship before, but her eyes told stories that no words could capture. There was a fierceness there, but also a quiet sadness, a depth that spoke of battles fought alone. She did not smile or greet him. Instead, she watched him carefully, as if testing his intentions before allowing any trust to grow. The trader noticed Samuel's hesitation and laughed lightly, a sound meant to provoke. "I'm warning you, man. She doesn't yield to anyone. Most who try leave with scars, some worse." The words were meant to scare, to make Samuel question his purpose here. But instead, they ignited a quiet resolve in him. He understood that the choice before him was not about fear or desire. It was about judgment, morality, and the strength of character. Samuel took a moment to assess the surroundings. Other traders and travelers whispered among themselves, throwing furtive glances at the woman. Their voices carried judgments born from fear or ignorance, labeling her with names that did not fit her reality. Samuel realized that most people in the camp were quick to accept the trader's framing without question. They saw a challenge or a threat. But Samuel saw a person whose story had been ignored, whose voice had been suppressed. The moral challenge of the situation became clear. The trader expected a reaction, fear, mockery, perhaps even greed. But Samuel could not comply with such expectations. He felt the weight of the frontier's harshness pressing upon him. Yet he also sensed an opportunity to act differently. The air seemed to grow heavier as the sun sank further, the orange light fading to a softer gold. Samuel dismounted fully and approached the stall more directly, his boots crunching on the dry soil. He kept his voice calm and measured as he addressed the trader. "I didn't come for trouble," he said. I came for supplies and news. Nothing more. The trader's smile widened, sensing the challenge in Samuel's tone. He leaned back slightly, giving the impression of a predator enjoying the hesitation of his prey. But Samuel remained composed, aware of the dynamics at play. He knew that every word, every glance, mattered in this space where trust was scarce, and motives were often hidden. The woman shifted slightly, her eyes never leaving Samuel. For a moment, there was silence, a tension-filled pause that seemed to stretch longer than it should. Samuel's gaze softened as he acknowledged her presence without judgment. He realized that fear or desire would be the wrong response here. Respect was the only approach that could possibly matter, and in that understanding, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared humanity. Even amidst the shadows of power and coercion that surrounded the camp, the trader, sensing his authority challenged, continued to press. You don't understand. She isn't like the others. She bites, she fights back. She won't obey. Most men would turn away. But maybe you're different. Rancher. Samuel did not respond immediately. Instead, he studied the woman, seeing the strength behind her eyes, the careful control in her stance. He saw someone who had endured suffering yet remained unbroken. Someone who demanded recognition not through words, but through presence. The trader's words, meant to provoke, only clarified Samuel's moral compass. He knew that any decision made in haste would compromise his principles. Samuel's mind wandered briefly to his own struggles, his dwindling cattle, his worn-down ranch, the long days spent battling weather, wolves, and economic hardship. Life had taught him that survival often required difficult choices, but not at the expense of decency or integrity. Here, in the dusty trading camp on the edge of Apache lands, he felt the same lesson unfolding. True strength was not measured by domination or fear, but by the ability to act rightly, even when easier options tempted him. He also understood that appearances could be deceiving. What the trader framed as danger was, in reality, a reflection of misunderstanding and misrepresentation. Other travelers watched quietly, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. Their curiosity mingled with the air of caution that hung over the camp. Samuel could feel the invisible eyes weighing him, judging his next move. Yet, he remained calm, deliberate. Every step, every gesture was carefully measured, not to show power, but to maintain integrity. He acknowledged the woman once more, with a simple nod that carried respect rather than ownership. That small gesture, seemingly insignificant, was perhaps the first real connection between them, an unspoken understanding that neither fear nor coercion would define their interaction. As the sun finally dipped behind the mountains, casting long, dark shadows over the camp, Samuel made a decision. He would not act out of fear, nor would he yield to the trader's manipulations. He had come seeking supplies, and perhaps a chance at stability, not to participate in cruelty or exploitation. The moment was heavy with possibility, for both him and the woman. In this place where the frontier's harshness often crushed morality underfoot, Samuel chose a different path. A path guided by respect, observation, and careful judgment. The night approached, bringing cooler air and a sense of quiet that contrasted sharply with the tense energy of the day. Fires burned in small clusters, smoke curling toward the darkening sky. Traders began closing stalls, and travelers sought tents or wagons for rest. Samuel remained by the stall a moment longer, considering his next steps. The woman remained still, her gaze steady. It was clear that whatever story lay ahead, it would be shaped not by force, but by choices, guided by courage and principle. And in that moment, Samuel felt a rare clarity, that survival and morality were not mutually exclusive, that true strength often lay in restraint and understanding. Finally, Samuel turned his attention back to the trader. He spoke calmly, decisively. I will not be part of what you are trying to do. I am here for what I need, and nothing more. Understand that. The trader's amusement faltered for a brief second, replaced by surprise. Most men would have reacted with fear, greed, or impatience. But Samuel had chosen otherwise, and as he walked toward his horse, ready to leave the camp when his business was done, the woman's eyes followed him, not with fear or challenge, but with something deeper, a quiet recognition that someone could exist in this harsh world, who saw her not as a weapon or a problem, but as a person. That small, fleeting understanding carried weight beyond words. In the days that followed, the events of that first encounter would linger in Samuel's mind. The trading camp, the warnings, the woman's silent strength all became part of a story that would shape his choices in the future. He understood that on the frontier, moments like these were rare and precious. They were tests of character, reminders that in a world often defined by struggle, cruelty, and survival, there was room for integrity, compassion, and respect. And it was in this understanding that Samuel found a small measure of peace, even as the frontier continued to challenge him at every turn. After the tense encounter at the trading camp, the rancher, Samuel, could not shake the image of the woman from his mind. Her presence had lingered like a shadow, a quiet force that spoke louder than the trader's mocking words. As he rode back to his ranch, the wind brushing against his face, he thought about her life. What circumstances had shaped someone so strong and unyielding? Someone whom even seasoned travelers described as untamable. Samuel had dealt with difficult people before, but he sensed that her story was different. It was not a story of malice or mischief. It was a story of survival, hardship, and resilience. The woman, whose name was Ayita, had endured a life that few could imagine. Orphaned at a young age, she had learned to navigate a world filled with danger and uncertainty. Her village had been attacked when she was just a girl, leaving her to fend for herself in a harsh and unforgiving land. Every step she had taken since then had been marked by caution, strength, and a refusal to be controlled by others. Unlike those around her who gave in to fear or despair, Ayita had developed an instinct to protect herself. Her biting, as the trader called it, was not cruelty, it was a survival instinct, honed through years of facing threats that others might have fled from. Ayita's reputation, as Samuel had heard it, was a mixture of truth and exaggeration. Stories had grown taller with each retelling at the camps and trading posts. Travelers spoke of her courage and defiance, painting her as a wild spirit who could not be tamed. But in reality, she had simply refused to allow anyone to take her freedom. Each encounter with strangers had tested her resolve, and she had learned to read people carefully, to understand their motives before trusting them. The trader's warnings were not entirely false, yet they were skewed to create fear and profit. Ayita had no desire to harm anyone who showed respect, but she would not allow herself to be treated as an object or a tool. After leaving the camp, Samuel found himself thinking more deeply about the world she lived in. The frontier was a harsh place, where survival often depended on strength, courage, and the ability to make quick decisions. Yet strength alone was not enough. It had to be guided by wisdom and moral judgment. Samuel realized that Ayita's life, filled with loss and challenge, had given her a wisdom of her own. She knew how to navigate danger without losing herself completely. And in that sense, she was more powerful than the trader or anyone else who measured power through fear or ownership. Meanwhile, Ayita herself had returned to the small, hidden shelter she called home. It was a modest dwelling, carefully camouflaged among the trees and rocks, providing her safety from prying eyes and hostile men. The shelter was simple, with only the bare necessities, but it represented freedom, a space where she could think, plan, and live without someone else's control. She had survived attacks, thefts, and threats from those who wished to exploit her, and every day she reinforced the boundaries that kept her safe. Yet even in solitude, Ayita knew the world outside would never forget her. Travelers and traders would continue to whisper stories, exaggerating or misrepresenting her actions. She had grown accustomed to this. It was part of the landscape of her life, a reminder that perception could be as dangerous as reality. Ayita spent the evening preparing a small meal over a fire, reflecting on the day's events. She remembered the rancher, Samuel, and the way he had carried himself calm, careful, and unwilling to be provoked. Most people who approached her did so with fear or arrogance, expecting her to react with anger or submission. Samuel had done neither. He had acknowledged her presence without attempting to dominate her. That simple act of recognition, without judgment or mockery, had caught her attention. For the first time in a long while, she wondered if there might be someone capable of seeing her as she truly was, not as a story or a warning. Back at his ranch, Samuel worked tirelessly to maintain his land. He repaired fences, fed the remaining cattle, and ensured that the water troughs were full. His mind often wandered to Aida and the lessons her presence had silently offered. He realized that the challenges he faced, loss, drought, and hardship, were similar to hers in one way. They required resilience, patience, and the courage to act rightly despite fear or temptation. He began to see her as a symbol of endurance, a living example of how strength combined with wisdom could survive even in the harshest conditions. Her story, though he only glimpsed it, became intertwined with his own understanding of morality and survival. The next day, Samuel returned to the camp briefly, under the pretext of collecting supplies he had arranged earlier. His curiosity about Aida was not driven by desire or ownership, but by respect and a need to understand. He wanted to see how she lived, how she interacted with the world, and whether there was a way to act justly in the midst of the frontier's challenges. When he arrived, he noticed the trader waiting, a sly expression on his face. Samuel approached cautiously, determined not to give the impression that he was there to be manipulated. He asked about supplies, his tone calm but firm. The trader's eyes flicked toward Aida, who was standing nearby but not acknowledging him directly. She was alert, aware of the tension, yet unafraid. The trader's words were sharp, designed to provoke. "Not many men can handle her, you know. She's not like the others. Most run or give in." Samuel listened carefully, recognizing the intent behind the statement. It was not meant to inform, but to manipulate. Samuel replied with quiet firmness, "I am not like most men. I am here to trade fairly, not to take advantage." The trader laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, recognizing that Samuel's resolve was different from the fear or greed he usually encountered. Samuel's response reflected not arrogance, but an understanding that integrity mattered more than convenience or profit. Aida observed the conversation, noting Samuel's demeanor. Most men would have responded with impatience, intimidation, or flattery. Samuel responded with neither. He treated her as a person, not a prize or a threat. She felt a flicker of something she had not experienced in years. Respect from someone outside her immediate circle. In a world that often sought to define her through fear or rumor, this small gesture mattered. It was a quiet recognition of her strength, without an attempt to exploit it. The trader, seeing that his usual tactics were ineffective, grew frustrated. He pressed Samuel further, attempting to provoke a reaction, but Samuel remained steady, refusing to engage in cruelty or mockery. As the day wore on, Samuel realized that understanding Aida's past and her approach to survival was crucial. Her defiance was not stubbornness. It was a strategy honed through experience. She had learned when to fight, when to retreat, and when to trust. Samuel understood that true courage was often quiet, deliberate, and guided by principle. By observing her, he gained insight into the challenges of the frontier, not just the physical hardships, but the moral and emotional landscapes that shaped lives. He began to see that strength without wisdom was dangerous, while wisdom without courage was ineffective. Aida embodied both, even if the world misunderstood her. That evening, as the camp quieted and travelers retreated to their tents, Samuel rode back toward his ranch, reflecting on the lessons he had learned. He thought about freedom, respect, and the importance of seeing people as they truly were, not as rumors or warnings suggested. He realized that the frontier tested not only survival skills but character, and that moments of moral clarity were rare and precious. Aida's presence had forced him to confront his assumptions and consider what it meant to act justly in a world that often rewarded fear and cruelty. Her life, though shrouded in mystery and misrepresentation, offered him a mirror to examine his own choices. Meanwhile, Aida returned to her shelter, preparing for another night of quiet reflection. She thought about the rancher, noting his calm, deliberate manner and his refusal to be swayed by fear or manipulation. Most men approached her with the expectation of control. Samuel had not. In that small observation, she found a rare spark of hope that not all encounters would end in violence, coercion, or misunderstanding. It was a small but significant realization that someone could exist in the harsh frontier who recognized her humanity without seeking to dominate or exploit it. In the days that followed, Samuel continued his work on the ranch while keeping Aida's story in mind. He considered how the values she represented, resilience, wisdom, and the courage to maintain integrity, could guide him in his own struggles. Though their paths had crossed only briefly, the encounter had left a lasting impression. It reminded him that strength was more than physical ability. It was moral courage, the ability to choose rightly when easier options tempted him. And in a world often defined by survival alone, such lessons were invaluable. Days passed since Samuel's first encounter with Aida, yet the memory of that brief meeting lingered in his mind like a quiet echo. He could not forget her eyes, so steady and unflinching, and the strength that seemed to radiate from her every movement. Most men in his place would have felt fear or impatience, perhaps even amusement, at the trader's warnings. But Samuel felt something different. A sense of responsibility. A quiet urging that he should do the right thing, even when it was not the easiest choice. He knew the frontier often demanded difficult decisions, but he also understood that moral choices carried weight far beyond immediate survival. The trading camp, where rumors and exaggerations had painted Aida as untamable and dangerous, remained a place Samuel could not ignore. He needed to know more about her story, not as a curiosity or a challenge, but to understand the human life behind the rumors. He prepared to return, riding through the plains with determination, aware that each mile brought him closer to a decision he had to face. His horse moved steadily, as if sensing the seriousness of his mission. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, a calm contrast to the tension he felt inside. Samuel knew that today, he could either choose fear and avoidance, or courage and integrity. When Samuel arrived at the trading camp, the air was filled with the usual mixture of dust, voices, and clattering supplies. The trader was already there, his sharp eyes scanning for opportunities. As Samuel approached, he noticed the way the trader's attention immediately shifted toward Aida. She stood near the edge of the camp, quiet and watchful, her posture firm. She did not greet Samuel, but her gaze met his, measuring him with a steady, unspoken question. "Can I trust you?" Most men had given up trying to understand her long ago. They saw only stories, exaggerations, and fear. Samuel, however, had approached differently. He did not come to dominate, to coerce, or to judge. He came with respect, observation, and a determination to act rightly. The trader's voice cut through the tension. "You're back, rancher. Do you think you can handle her?" he said, his tone teasing and meant to provoke. He laughed lightly, a sound meant to assert control, but Samuel ignored the taunt. He understood the game the trader played. Exaggeration and manipulation to make others act out of fear or greed. Samuel's response was calm and deliberate. "I am not here to handle anyone," he said. "I am here to trade fairly and to understand. I will not be part of cruelty or manipulation." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of conviction. Samuel knew that acting with principle, even in a place where many sought advantage, was the only way to preserve his own integrity. Aida watched closely. She had seen many men come and go, most of them expecting her to react with fear, anger, or submission. Samuel reacted with none of these. Instead, He acknowledged her presence without forcing interaction, without attempting to claim power over her. That small difference mattered more than she could express. In a world that often reduced people to tools, weapons, or objects of fear, Samuel's behavior was a rare sign of respect. She had lived long enough to know that respect was not given lightly. It had to be observed and tested through actions. Samuel's calmness, his refusal to be provoked, and his quiet attention spoke louder than any words could. The traitor, sensing that his usual tactics were failing, tried again to manipulate the situation. "You don't understand. Most men fail. She bites. She fights. She won't obey. Are you sure you want to risk this?" His voice carried the weight of expectation, of pressure meant to influence Samuel's decision. But Samuel stood firm, recognizing that the real choice was not about danger or convenience. It was about integrity. "I understand," he said. "I will not be swayed by fear or threats. I am here to do what is right, not what is easy." The traitor's smile faltered slightly, realizing that Samuel's courage was not the kind born of arrogance or bravado, but of a deliberate moral choice. Seeing the determination in Samuel's eyes, Aida began to consider the possibility that this man was different from the others she had encountered. He did not seek to control her, exploit her, or judge her by stories. He observed, he respected, and he acted with care. That realization stirred a cautious curiosity within her. She had learned to trust no one easily, and the frontier had taught her that misjudgment could be deadly. Yet Samuel's demeanor suggested patience and understanding, qualities she rarely saw in the people who crossed her path. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if someone could truly acknowledge her autonomy without seeking to diminish it. Tension in the camp grew as the traitor attempted to push the situation further. He encouraged other travelers to intervene, to pressure Samuel into a decision he did not wish to make. Whispers floated through the air, some mocking, others cautionary. Samuel remained focused, refusing to respond with anger or defensiveness. He recognized that the opinions of the crowd were irrelevant compared to the choice before him. The moment was no longer about trade or rumor, it was about moral clarity. Samuel's decision had to reflect his values, not the expectations of others. Every step he took, every word he spoke, reinforced his commitment to act with integrity. The hours passed slowly, the sun climbing higher and casting sharp shadows across the camp. Samuel realized that his presence alone was challenging the assumptions of those around him. By refusing to play the traitor's game, by acknowledging Aida as a person rather than a story, he disrupted the usual balance of fear and control. Aida, too, observed this quietly. She began to recognize that this man's actions aligned with principles she valued: respect, fairness, and the courage to act rightly in difficult circumstances. The unspoken understanding between them deepened, though neither spoke it aloud. It was a silent recognition of mutual awareness and a shared sense of morality. As the day wore on, Samuel made a choice that would define the path ahead. He would not buy Aida, nor would he attempt to dominate or control her. Instead, he took a stand against the traitor's manipulations, offering to pay only for fair trade and nothing more. This decision was risky. It challenged the traitor's authority, threatened Samuel's safety, and defied the expectations of those around them. Yet it was the only choice that aligned with his principles. He knew that courage was not measured by force, but by the willingness to uphold integrity even when easier options were tempting. Aida watched as Samuel calmly outlined his terms. There was no arrogance, no aggression, only firmness and fairness. The traitor's frustration became visible, but Samuel remained unshaken. His actions communicated something Aida had rarely seen: a commitment to justice without the need for dominance. She felt a quiet respect for this man who navigated the treacherous social currents of the frontier without compromising his values. In her eyes, Samuel's decision represented a different kind of strength, one that relied on moral clarity rather than intimidation or coercion. By the afternoon, the situation reached a critical moment. The traitor, realizing that Samuel would not yield, attempted one final manipulation. He raised his voice, attempting to provoke fear or anger. Yet Samuel responded with measured calm, refusing to be baited. Aida noticed the steadiness in his actions, the careful observation, and the deliberate choice to maintain dignity and fairness. That moment crystallized her understanding that Samuel was not like the others who had crossed her path. He could act with courage while honoring her autonomy, a rare combination in the harsh frontier world. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows over the dusty camp, Samuel prepared to leave. He had completed his fair trade, refused to participate in the trader's schemes, and maintained his integrity throughout. Aida remained still, observing him, her expression unreadable yet thoughtful. Their encounter, brief though it had been, had created a bond of understanding, an acknowledgement of character, rather than ownership. In the quiet of that late afternoon, both recognized that the choices made in the face of challenge could define not only their own lives, but also the way others saw and treated the world around them. The journey back to his ranch was quiet for Samuel. He reflected on the lessons of the day, understanding that true strength often lay not in action but in restraint, not in dominance, but in moral courage. He had confronted a situation where fear and greed could have guided him, yet he had chosen a path that honored both himself and another human being. Aida's presence, her quiet resistance, and careful observation had shaped his understanding of what it meant to act rightly in a world often governed by survival alone. Aida, too, reflected on the encounter as she returned to her shelter. She considered the man who had acted differently from the others, who had refused to be drawn into cruelty or manipulation. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine that not all men would attempt to control or exploit her. Samuel's actions had given her a glimpse of a world in which respect and fairness were possible, even amidst hardship and danger. That realization, though quiet and internal, had the power to change her perception of the frontier and the people within it. By nightfall, both Samuel and Aida had returned to their separate spaces, carrying with them the weight of a shared understanding. Though they were apart, their thoughts remained intertwined through mutual recognition of courage, respect, and moral choice. The encounter had tested each of them, revealing not only the harsh realities of the frontier but also the possibility of integrity and trust. It became clear that the story of their meeting was not about fear or domination. It was about human character, resilience, and the courage to act rightly even when the stakes were high. The days following Samuel's encounter with Aida were quiet but filled with reflection. The frontier often offered challenges that were physical, but it also tested the mind and the heart. Samuel continued his work on the ranch, tending to his remaining cattle, repairing fences, and preparing for the next harsh season. Yet, his thoughts frequently returned to Aida, not out of desire or curiosity, but because she had shown him something rare, a form of courage and self-respect that was uncommon in the world around them. In a land where fear and force often dictated interactions, she had refused to bow to pressure, standing firm in her principles. That quality had left an impression that lingered in Samuel's mind like a quiet lesson. Meanwhile, Aida moved carefully through her days, aware of the dangers that surrounded her but also mindful of the small freedoms she still possessed. The trading camp, the traders' manipulations, and the whispers of travelers were a distant but ever-present reality. Yet, she had felt a flicker of trust in Samuel, a trust built not on words, but on his actions. He had refused to participate in cruelty or control. And in doing so, he had given her a reason to reconsider what interactions with outsiders could look like. For Aida, this was a rare occurrence, and it reminded her that the frontier, despite its hardships, still held possibilities for moral clarity and understanding. Weeks passed, and the seasons began to shift. The harsh sun of late summer gave way to cooler winds and soft rains that hinted at the approaching autumn. Samuel's ranch, though still struggling, was gradually stabilizing. He had begun to repair the fences more thoroughly, dig new troughs for the cattle, and organize supplies to survive the winter. His work kept him busy, but the memory of Aida's strength and presence remained with him. He thought often about the lessons her behavior had taught him, that true courage and power were measured not by force, but by the ability to act with integrity, even when the easy path would be to yield to fear or greed. One day, News reached Samuel through a passing traveler that Aida had moved closer to the outskirts of a nearby settlement, taking refuge in a more accessible area of the frontier. The traveler spoke cautiously, aware of the stories that had grown around her name. Yet they also noted her intelligence, caution, and determination. Samuel understood that this could be a chance to encounter her again, but he knew he must approach with the same care and respect as before. This was not about ownership, control, or heroism. It was about observing, acknowledging, and ensuring that any interaction respected her autonomy. When Samuel arrived near the area where Aida had been seen, he dismounted his horse carefully, scanning the surroundings. The landscape was rugged, with uneven terrain, rocky outcrops, and patches of thick grass that provided both shelter and danger. He moved slowly, understanding that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. In the distance, he saw her standing near a small stream, collecting water and observing the surroundings. Her posture was alert but composed, every movement precise, reflecting years of experience in a world where caution was necessary for survival. Aida noticed Samuel as he approached, her eyes measuring him silently. She had learned to read people quickly, understanding intent through small gestures, tone, and actions. Samuel, she observed, carried no arrogance or condescension. His approach was deliberate and calm, reflecting a willingness to act respectfully and fairly. She had encountered many men who claimed to understand, but their actions often betrayed their words. This time, however, she felt a difference. Samuel's presence suggested a genuine commitment to moral choice, a quality she valued deeply, even if she did not yet fully trust him. Samuel stopped at a respectful distance, speaking in a quiet, measured tone. "Aida, I hope I am not intruding. I came because I wanted to make sure you are safe and to offer help if it is needed." Nothing more. The simplicity of his words carried weight. There was no claim of ownership, no expectation of gratitude or compliance, only recognition of her autonomy and an offer of support. Aida considered this carefully. She had faced countless challenges where offers of help had masked control or exploitation, but Samuel's consistency in behavior, observed over multiple encounters, suggested that his words were genuine. The conversation remained brief, but its impact was significant. Aida accepted the offer of assistance in small ways, supplies for daily needs, advice on navigating the region, and support without interference. Samuel provided help quietly, ensuring that it did not compromise her independence. Over time, a subtle trust developed between them, built not on dependence, but on mutual recognition of integrity and character. Both had learned valuable lessons. Samuel about the resilience and autonomy of others, and Aida about the rare possibility of encountering someone who respected her without attempting to dominate. As weeks turned into months, the frontier continued to test both Samuel and Aida. Harsh weather, economic struggles, and the ever-present threat of bandits and predators required careful planning, vigilance, and moral clarity. Yet, through these challenges, they observed each other from a distance, learning and adapting. Samuel noted her intelligence and cautious courage, while Aida recognized his commitment to fairness and integrity. Their connection, though never coercive or dependent, became a source of mutual respect and understanding, a reminder that the frontier's hardships could be met with resilience, guided by principle. During one particularly cold morning, Samuel encountered a situation that tested his principles once again. A neighboring rancher, motivated by greed, attempted to take advantage of a dispute over land boundaries. Samuel responded not with aggression but with reasoned negotiation, using evidence, patience, and moral authority to resolve the conflict peacefully. Aida, observing from a safe distance, recognized the same qualities she had seen in him before: courage tempered by wisdom, and strength expressed through integrity rather than force. The incident reinforced her belief that Samuel was different, someone who could navigate challenges without compromising values or attempting to dominate others. Over time, their paths crossed more frequently, yet always in ways that preserved Aida's autonomy. They shared knowledge about the land, strategies for protecting livestock, and ways to endure harsh weather. These interactions, though practical, also carried deeper significance. Samuel learned from Aida's resilience, her ability to read people and anticipate danger, while Aida observed Samuel's moral courage and patience. Their mutual respect grew steadily, founded not on dependence or ownership, but on recognition of each other's character and humanity. Eventually, Samuel came to understand that true success on the frontier was not measured solely by wealth, land, or physical survival. It was also measured by the quality of one's choices, the ability to act rightly even when circumstances were difficult, and the respect one afforded to others. Aida, in turn, recognized that moral clarity and integrity could exist in others, even in a world often dominated by fear and exploitation. Their relationship, built on observation, respect, and careful interaction, became an example of how human connection could thrive in harsh environments without coercion or domination. As winter approached, both Samuel and Aida prepared for the challenges ahead. Samuel fortified his ranch, organized supplies, and ensured his cattle were protected from the cold. Aida maintained her shelter, gathered resources, and planned for any unforeseen threats. Their experiences had taught them that survival required not only skill and strength but also thoughtful, ethical decision-making. Each had learned from the other that courage and resilience were most meaningful when guided by principle, and that true human connection was grounded in mutual respect rather than control. By the end of the year, the frontier had tested Samuel and Aida in countless ways, through harsh weather, economic uncertainty, and moral challenges. Yet, through these trials, they had discovered that integrity, courage, and respect could endure even in difficult circumstances. Their story, though filled with hardship, became a testament to the power of moral clarity, the importance of autonomy, and the strength found in choosing rightly when faced with pressure and expectation. It was a story that reflected not only survival, but the deeper principles that make survival meaningful: respect, courage, and shared humanity. The story concludes with both Samuel and Aida standing on the edge of the plains, observing the land they had learned to navigate with care and insight. There was no ownership, no claim, no expectation, only recognition of each other's strength, resilience, and moral courage. They had faced the frontier and its challenges, not by dominating or controlling, but by acting with integrity and respect. In a harsh world where fear and force often prevailed, their story was a quiet, powerful reminder that human dignity and moral clarity could endure, and that survival was not only about living, but about choosing rightly along the way.